What's the most horrifying thing you've witnessed at a wedding? Story 1. My cousin's wedding was supposed to be a dreamy outdoor ceremony at a gorgeous botanical garden. Everything was perfect. Blue skies, a soft breeze, and birds chirping. Just as the bride was about to walk down the aisle, a massive thunderstorm rolled in, seemingly out of nowhere. Guests scrambled for cover, but there wasn't enough shelter for everyone. The sound system got fried by a lightning strike, the cake got soaked, and the flowers wilted within minutes. The bride, drenched and in tears, tripped in the mud, ruining her dress. To top it all off, the venue blamed the family for not securing enough weather protection, so they were charged an extra cleanup fee. Despite everything, they did say their vows in front of their closest family members under a flimsy pop-up tent. The pictures were chaotic, but they're the couple's favorite reminder that love conquers all, even torrential downpours. Story 2. I once attended a wedding where the best man decided to wing his speech after a few too many drinks. He started with, "Well, I've never really liked groom's name much, but I guess he's all right since bride's name is marrying him." Awkward laughter filled the room, but it got worse. He launched into a story about a wild bachelor party involving a strip club, some questionable behavior, and a significant sum of money the groom had to borrow. The bride's family looked mortified. Her grandmother left the room. The bride stared daggers at her husband, who was beet red, while the groom muttered, "Shut up, man," under his breath. The kicker? The best man ended his speech by saying, "Anyway, here's to hoping this lasts longer than I thought it would." The room fell into an awkward silence, and the couple's first dance was visibly tense. Unsurprisingly, the groom and the best man haven't spoken since. Story 3. My sister's wedding took an unexpected turn when the officiant went rogue. They had asked a family friend to officiate, someone they trusted to keep things light but heartfelt. Instead, he used the ceremony to launch into a 20-minute monologue about the institution of marriage being a trap set by society. He sprinkled in statistics about divorce rates and quoted philosophers about the futility of love. Guests looked at each other in confusion, unsure if this was some elaborate joke. My sister and her fiancé were visibly uncomfortable, exchanging, "What the heck is happening?" looks. Eventually, my mom stood up, interrupted him, and demanded he stick to the script. He tried to argue, but my dad joined in, saying, "This is their day, not your TED Talk." The officiant begrudgingly wrapped up the ceremony, but by then, the vibe was ruined. We still laugh about it, though it took my sister a while to find the humor. Story 4. At my friend's wedding, the caterer accidentally served food that the bride was severely allergic to. Despite listing her allergies multiple times and confirming with the caterer beforehand, they somehow managed to include shrimp in several dishes. The bride took one bite of what she thought was a safe pasta dish and immediately went into anaphylactic shock. Chaos erupted. Her face swelled up and she struggled to breathe. Someone called 911 while her maid of honor administered her EpiPen. The ambulance arrived quickly, but the bride had to spend the rest of her wedding night in the hospital. The groom stayed by her side, and when she was stable, he proposed all over again in her hospital room to cheer her up. It was a nightmare in the moment, but they always tell the story as a testament to their love and resilience. Story 5. During my cousin's wedding, the DJ completely lost control of the playlist. The bride had painstakingly curated a list of songs to ensure everyone had a great time. But the DJ decided to improvise by adding his own tracks, most of which were explicit rap songs and inappropriate club hits. At one point, he played Blurred Lines right after the father-daughter dance, which made everyone cringe. Then, during the cake cutting, he blared a song with lyrics about cheating, completely ruining the moment. The bride stormed over to confront him, only for him to argue that his selections kept the party alive. Eventually, the groom unplugged his equipment and announced that they'd play music off a phone for the rest of the night. The crowd cheered, but the bride was livid. The DJ refused to refund them, claiming he'd done his job. Now, my cousin advises every engaged couple she knows to double-check their DJ's playlist. Story 6. My friend's wedding turned into a disaster thanks to an attempt at a romantic gesture gone wrong. The groom had planned to release white doves as a surprise during the first kiss. Sounds sweet, right? Well, when the time came, the doves didn't gracefully fly off as expected. Instead, they started circling the guests, and, to everyone's horror, one of them pooped directly on the bride's dress. The bride froze, completely mortified, while guests tried to stifle nervous laughter. To make matters worse, one of the doves crash-landed onto the wedding cake, knocking over the top tier entirely. What was supposed to be a fairy tale moment became a slapstick comedy sketch. Fortunately, the bride and groom managed to laugh about it later, though the cake was unsalvageable. The photo of the dove on the cake ended up becoming a meme among their friends. Story 7. At my cousin's wedding, the entire reception hall lost power just before the first dance. Initially, people thought it was a minor hiccup until the venue manager confessed they'd forgotten to pay the electricity bill. The entire hall was plunged into darkness, with only candles and phone flashlights providing dim lighting. The bride was nearly in tears and the groom was angrily arguing with the staff. They ended up cutting the cake by car headlights, with guests taking turns holding flashlights for them. The first dance? Played from a Bluetooth speaker while a groomsman strummed an acoustic guitar. It actually made the evening feel strangely magical despite the chaos. Still, they had to fight for weeks to get a refund from the venue. Story 8. I was a bridesmaid at a wedding where the groom's ex-girlfriend showed up uninvited. She didn't just sit quietly in the back either. She wore a white dress. Yep, a full-on white gown with a train. At first, everyone assumed she was just trying to get attention. But halfway through the ceremony, she stood up and interrupted the officiant, yelling, "He doesn't love her. He's marrying the wrong woman." The bride turned pale and the groom was visibly shaking. Security was called, but not before the ex threw a glass of champagne at the bride's dress, staining it. She was escorted out and the couple somehow continued with the ceremony, but the entire room was tense. The bride and groom did their best to move on, but the drama dominated the reception gossip for the entire. Story 9. At my brother's wedding, the cake delivery was a total nightmare. The bakery delivered the wrong cake, bright neon pink, covered in glitter, and designed for a kid's birthday party. It even had a cartoon unicorn. The bride freaked out since they had ordered a classic, elegant white cake with delicate floral accents. The delivery driver apologized but had no solution since the bakery was already closed. The couple tried to make the best of it, and the guests even thought it was a prank at first. Eventually, they decided to cut the unicorn cake anyway, but the inside was rainbow-colored, further ruining the classy theme. The couple now jokes that their marriage started with chaos but has been sweet ever since. Story 10. My friend's outdoor wedding was picture perfect, until the wind decided otherwise. It started as a gentle breeze but quickly turned into strong gusts just as the ceremony began. The bride's veil flew off mid-aisle, and a groomsman had to chase it across the field. The flower arrangements kept tipping over, and the tablecloths were practically sailing off the tables. But the worst part? During the vows, a gust hit so hard that the entire wedding arch toppled over, narrowly missing the couple. Guests gasped, and the officiant even dropped his papers. The couple laughed it off and finished their vows holding hands without the arch. Later, the photos of the arch disaster went viral in a wedding fails post. At least it made for a memorable story. Story 11. At my coworker's wedding, everything seemed perfect, until the bride's ex-boyfriend showed up drunk. He wasn't even invited but somehow got past security. Halfway through the reception, he grabbed the microphone during a toast and slurred his way through a bizarre rant about how the bride settled for less. The groom tried to stay calm, but when the ex shouted, "You know she called me last month, right?" things escalated. The bride was mortified, and the groom lunged toward the ex, leading to a brief scuffle before security finally dragged the guy out. The awkward tension lingered for the rest of the night, but the couple tried to salvage the mood with an upbeat dance floor. The whole incident turned into a lesson for their friends. Always triple-check the guest list. Story 12. My cousin's wedding disaster was straight out of a movie. They had a rustic barn wedding planned, complete with hay bales and fairy lights. But they didn't account for one thing: the farm animals nearby. During the vows, a curious goat somehow escaped its pen and wandered into the ceremony, knocking over a candle stand. It didn't start a fire, thankfully, but the loud clang startled the bride, who tripped on her dress and fell face first into the grass. Then, as if scripted for maximum chaos, a chicken flapped into the reception area and landed right on the dessert table. The cupcakes were destroyed. Guests tried to help, but the animals kept wandering back in throughout the night. The couple eventually embraced the absurdity and turned it into a barnyard bash theme. But the bride definitely wasn't laughing at the time. Story 13. I attended a destination wedding where everything that could go wrong did. The venue was a stunning beach resort, but on the morning of the wedding, a massive storm hit. The entire outdoor setup was ruined. Chairs overturned, the floral arch collapsed, and half the decor washed away. Worse, the wedding planner was unreachable, leaving the couple scrambling to find a backup location. They finally relocated to a cramped, dimly lit conference room inside the resort. The bride was devastated, and the reception felt more like a corporate retreat than a wedding. But the ultimate disaster? The officiant mispronounced both the bride and groom's names during the vows. Twice. The couple still jokes that their marriage was officially blessed under the wrong names. Story 14. At my uncle's wedding, the ring bearer, a hyperactive 6-year-old, decided to turn the aisle into his personal racetrack. He sprinted down at full speed, tripped over his own feet, and face-planted. Everyone gasped. But the kid bounced back up, only to realize the wedding rings had flown out of the pillow. Guests were on their hands and knees searching under chairs while the poor kid kept sobbing. "I lost the rings." After a tense few minutes, the rings were finally found under the altar. The bride comforted the ring bearer with a piece of cake afterward, but he still gets teased about it at family events. Story 15. At my friend's wedding, the catering was a nightmare. The venue promised a gourmet dinner, but what arrived was barely edible. The roast chicken was undercooked, the pasta was ice cold, and the vegetarian meals were completely forgotten. When the bride complained, the staff's response? "You should have brought snacks." Guests ended up leaving early, and the couple had to order pizzas for the afterparty. The venue refused to refund them, claiming the food was served, even though most plates were untouched. The couple now jokes that their real wedding feast was pepperoni pizza and garlic bread. Memorable, if not classy. Story 16. At my sister's wedding, the reception was set in a beautiful vineyard with an open bar. Everything seemed perfect until a guest who had a bit too much to drink mistook the vineyard's wine barrels for a dance. While everyone was enjoying the music, he climbed onto one of the barrels, declaring he would serenade the bride. Unfortunately, the barrel wasn't stable. It tipped, spilling red wine all over the bride's pristine white dress. She burst into tears while guests scrambled to help clean the mess. The best man offered his jacket to cover the stain, but the damage was done. The photos were carefully cropped for obvious reasons, but the bride still can't look at red wine without cringing. Story 17. A friend of mine had a rain or shine outdoor wedding. They were so committed to the aesthetic that they refused to rent a tent, even with rain in the forecast. Well, the forecast wasn't lying. An hour before the ceremony, a torrential downpour started. Guests arrived soaking wet, trying to cover themselves with whatever they could find. Umbrellas, jackets, even programs. The bride was determined to stick with the plan and walked down the aisle in the rain, but her dress soaked up so much water that the hem started turning brown. By the time they exchanged vows, her makeup was streaming down her face, and half the guests had left early. The photos looked less like a wedding and more like a survival documentary. Story 18. At a wedding I attended last summer, the groom's pants split during the first dance. It was supposed to be a romantic, choreographed routine they'd spent months practicing. Everything was going well until the big dip moment, where he leaned back dramatically and his tuxedo pants ripped wide open. The guests gasped, but the groom kept dancing, clearly hoping no one had noticed. Unfortunately, they definitely did. Someone captured the entire incident on video, and it went viral among the guests' group chat within the hour. The bride laughed so hard she cried, and now it's become their favorite wedding memory. They even framed a photo of the moment of disaster alongside their official wedding portraits. Story 19. During my cousin's wedding, the officiant mixed up the couples. He had a few weddings scheduled that weekend and accidentally began reading vows from another couple's ceremony script. It started subtly, with references to hobbies neither the bride nor groom had. But then he said, "May you continue your love for hiking and skiing," which made the couple exchange confused glances since they were more of a Netflix and pizza pair. The bride whispered something, and the officiant just kept going until finally realizing his mistake halfway through the ring exchange. They finished the ceremony with the right script, but the bride still jokes that she married the wrong version of her husband that day. Story 20. At a wedding I photographed, the cake was so tall it needed a ladder to assemble. It was a stunning 5-tier masterpiece with delicate sugar flowers and pearls. However, just as the couple prepared for the cake cutting, one of the caterers accidentally bumped the table. The entire cake wobbled and then slowly collapsed like a sugary landslide. Guests screamed. The bride looked on in horror as tears smashed into the floor one by one. The only thing salvageable? The cake topper, which the couple jokingly fed each other for their photo. The catering company later made a replacement cake for free, but it didn't have the same grandeur. Story 21. At my friend's wedding, the bride's mother decided to surprise everyone with a personalized performance during the reception. No one knew what to expect, but halfway through dinner, the lights dimmed, and she took the stage in a sparkly dress holding a karaoke microphone. What followed was a painfully off-key rendition of "My Heart Will Go On," complete with interpretive dance moves involving a scarf. Guests exchanged awkward glances while the bride buried her face in her hands. As if that wasn't enough, she followed it up with a heartfelt but very personal speech about the bride's ex-boyfriends and how relieved she was that her daughter had finally landed someone decent. The couple still cringes when they rewatch the wedding video because the entire performance was captured from multiple angles. Story 22. At my cousin's wedding, the flower girl had a full-on meltdown right before walking down the aisle. She was only 4 years old and decided she hated the dress and refused to carry the basket. After some coaxing, She finally agreed to walk but started chucking the flower petals at guests instead of sprinkling them gently. People were getting hit in the face with rose petals while she laughed maniacally. The best part? When she reached the altar, she turned to the officiant and loudly asked, "When do we get cake?" The couple handled it gracefully and let her have a cupcake before the ceremony was even over. She stole the show, but at least it was adorable chaos. Story 23. A wedding I attended had a beautiful lakeside ceremony planned. The bride and groom exchanged vows on a dock, with the water reflecting the sunset, picture perfect. Until the best man, while handing the rings over, dropped one. It didn't just hit the dock, it bounced right into the lake. Silence fell as everyone stared in horror. The groom looked ready to dive in when the officiant suggested using the bride's mother's ring temporarily. A professional diver was hired the next day to recover the original ring. But the couple jokes that their real wedding didn't happen until the replacement was retrieved. Story 24. At my sister's wedding, they had an elaborate candle lighting ceremony with a massive candelabra behind the altar. Beautiful, but dangerous. During the vows, one of the tall candles burned down faster than expected and caught part of the floral arrangement on fire. Guests gasped as flames started spreading up the draped greenery. Thankfully, one of the groomsmen was quick on his feet and used his jacket to smother the flames. The ceremony continued, but the scent of burnt flowers lingered throughout the reception. The bride still insists on no candles for every anniversary dinner since. Story 25. At a destination wedding I attended, the couple had booked a beautiful cliffside venue overlooking the ocean. The wind was strong but manageable at first. Right as the bride was walking down the aisle, a powerful gust caught her veil, whipping it straight into the ocean below. She froze, unsure whether to keep walking or chase it. The officiant tried to keep the mood light, joking, a sign to let go of material things, but the bride was visibly upset. After the ceremony, a group of groomsmen actually climbed down to retrieve the veil from the rocks. It was tattered and wet but returned as a war trophy for their reception speech. Story 26. At my best friend's wedding, the DJ completely botched the playlist. The couple had provided a carefully curated list of songs they loved, but the DJ decided to freestyle instead. During the first dance, he played a breakup song, Adele's "Someone Like You." The bride looked confused, while the groom whispered angrily at the DJ, who shrugged like it was no big deal. Later, during the cake cutting, he randomly blasted "Baby Got Back," which might have been funny if the bride's grandmother hadn't been sitting right there. The final straw came when he played the groom's ex's favorite song for the bouquet toss. The couple asked him to leave early and ended up finishing the night with a Spotify playlist off someone's phone. Story 27. I attended a wedding where the officiant completely forgot the couple's names mid-ceremony. It started off sweet, but as he reached the vows, he suddenly paused, went pale, and mumbled, "Do you, take what was your name again?" The guests thought it was a joke, until the awkward silence stretched. The bride whispered her name, and the officiant nervously continued but then referred to the groom as Michael instead of his actual name, David. It got so uncomfortable that the groom finally whispered, "I'm David." The couple was able to laugh it off later, but they joked that the officiant was definitely invited by the bride's side. Story 28. At my cousin's wedding, the groom's brother, who was supposed to give a heartfelt speech, ended up turning it into a comedy roast, except it wasn't funny. He made jokes about how the groom had been a ladies' man for too long, and even teased the bride, saying, "Wow, you're the first one who stuck around. Congrats." The audience was visibly uncomfortable, but he kept going, mentioning ex-girlfriends by name and making the bride blush for all the wrong reasons. The groom finally took the microphone, said, "Thanks for the kind words," and moved on. Safe to say, the brother was left out of the anniversary celebrations. Story 29. At a beach wedding I attended, the couple had a sand ceremony where they each poured colored sand into a glass vase to symbolize their union. Well, as they were pouring, a huge gust of wind hit. Sand flew everywhere, getting into guests' drinks, food, and even the officiant's eyes. The worst part? The bride's expensive custom sand got blown completely away, while the groom's blue sand remained. It looked like he was marrying himself. They had to redo the ceremony inside later. To this day, the bride insists on calling it the Sands of Divorce. Story 30. At my sister's wedding, they rented an extravagant 3-tier chocolate fountain for the dessert table. It was a stunning centerpiece until disaster struck. A young flower girl, unsupervised, decided to dip her entire hand into the fountain, causing chocolate to splash everywhere, including on the bride's dress. The fountain's motor then started making a weird noise before completely breaking down mid-reception, leaving a congealed chocolate mess on the table. To top it off, The staff tried to salvage the situation by offering chocolate syrup in bowls instead. Let's just say no one was impressed. The bride was mostly upset about her dress, but managed to laugh when she saw the photos. Story 31. At my friend's wedding, the ceremony was set in a gorgeous botanical garden. The bride was absolutely radiant, and the groom looked emotional as she walked down the aisle. Everything was perfect, until the vows. Just as the bride began speaking, a peacock, yes, a literal peacock, from the garden's aviary strutted into the ceremony and let out an ear-piercing scream. The guests laughed nervously, but the bird kept squawking at random intervals throughout the vows. At one point, it even flapped its wings and startled the flower girl into dropping her basket. The couple managed to finish the vows, but the peacock photobombed nearly every wedding picture. Now they joke that their marriage was blessed by nature itself. Story 32. At my cousin's winter wedding, everything was planned perfectly, except for the weather. A freak snowstorm hit the day before, and many guests were stuck at the airport. The wedding went ahead with a smaller crowd, but things really went downhill when the heating at the venue failed. Guests were shivering in their formal attire, and the bride's lace dress was clearly not designed for below-freezing temperatures. Halfway through the reception, the pipes froze, causing a minor flood in the restrooms. The bride and groom ended up changing into matching hoodies and jeans, while the guests huddled together drinking hot cocoa. It was a disaster, but also kind of wholesome by the end. Story 33. I attended a wedding where the cake cutting turned into absolute chaos. The cake was a beautiful, 6-tiered masterpiece. But when the bride and groom made the first cut, they didn't realize the bottom tier was made of styrofoam for display purposes. The knife wouldn't go through, and in their confusion, they accidentally knocked the entire cake off the stand. It toppled over, smashing into the dance floor in slow motion. Guests gasped. The bride shrieked, and the groom tried to salvage the situation by scooping up a handful of frosting and playfully smearing it on his own face. The couple laughed it off in the end, but the bakery had to rush over with backup sheet cakes just to feed the guests. Story 34. At my college roommate's wedding, the bride's father gave a speech that completely derailed the reception. He started off sweet, talking about how proud he was of his daughter. But then, out of nowhere, he launched into a rambling story about her teenage rebellious phase, including the time she was grounded for sneaking out. The bride looked horrified as he continued, sharing more embarrassing childhood anecdotes, including the fact that she had once dyed her hair purple after a breakup. The groom tried to laugh it off, but the bride stormed out of the reception halfway through the speech. The father apologized the next day, but it definitely left a scar on the event. Story 35. At my aunt's wedding, they decided to release lanterns into the sky after the reception as a symbolic gesture. It was beautiful, until one lantern drifted straight into a nearby tree. The flame caught the dry branches, and suddenly, part of the tree was on fire. Guests panicked, some trying to throw drinks on it, while others ran for the fire extinguisher. Luckily, the fire was small and got put out quickly, but the venue wasn't thrilled about the scorch marks on their landscape. The couple now jokes that their love set the world on fire, literally.